In a city that never sleeps, where lights flicker through curtains and horns echo through rain, there lived a woman named Raina. She wasn't invisible, but she had learned how to disappear. Every morning, she walked through the same crowded street, past the same coffee shop, past the same billboard that promised happiness starts with success. People saw her, but they never looked, and maybe that was why Raina stopped looking back. Her world had shrunk to quiet routines, a small apartment on the 5th floor, a cracked coffee mug she refused to throw away, a clock that ticked too loudly in an empty room. She had dreams once, colors, canvases, laughter, but now they slept in a box under her bed. When the rain came, she would open the window and whisper to herself, "It's okay. You're still here." But even she didn't know who she was saying it to. That morning was different. The streets were flooded. The air smelled of dust and rain and loneliness. Raina walked quickly, holding her umbrella low, trying to avoid the world. And then, she stopped. A small sound. A cry so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. She looked down. There, under a broken cardboard box, was a tiny white kitten, trembling, soaked to the bone. Its eyes were half closed, its fur clinging to its body like a forgotten memory. Raina hesitated for a moment, her heart caught between fear and instinct. Then slowly, she knelt down. Rainwater ran over her hands as she reached out. The kitten looked up at her, and for one fragile moment, two lonely souls recognized each other. She wrapped it in her scarf. The same old red scarf that still carried her scent of coffee and paint, and whispered, "Don't cry. I know what it feels like to be alone." The kitten blinked, and something inside Raina melted, a warmth she thought she'd buried years ago. She stood up, holding the tiny life close to her chest. The city moved around her, indifferent, busy, blind. But for Raina, time had stopped. As she walked home through the rain, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of being seen, because in her arms, she carried something that had chosen her, not for who she was, but simply because she stopped and cared. When she reached her apartment, she found an old towel and dried the kitten carefully. It sneezed once, then curled up inside her palm as if it had always belonged there. Raina smiled, a small, quiet smile that even she didn't notice. "You need a name," she said softly. "Something pure. Something that sounds like peace." She looked out the window, rain still falling against the glass, turning the world into silver. "Snow," she whispered. "Your name is Snow." The kitten looked up and meowed once, as if agreeing. Raina laughed softly. For the first time, the sound didn't echo back empty. And in that small moment, something shifted. A spark in the silence. A whisper of belonging. Raina didn't know it yet, but that tiny heartbeat she'd rescued from the street was about to rescue her too. The next morning felt different. Not because the rain had stopped, but because the silence had changed. Raina woke up to a sound she hadn't heard in years, a soft purr. Snow was sleeping right next to her pillow, a tiny ball of white fur, breathing peacefully as sunlight spilled through the thin curtains. For a moment, Raina just watched, her hand hovering near the kitten's tiny chest, feeling its heartbeat fast and strong. "You survived the night," she whispered. "So maybe I can too." She stood up, made herself tea, and found an old bowl for milk. Snow followed her everywhere, tiny steps echoing across the apartment's wooden floor. The clock ticked slower. The morning light looked warmer. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. That day, Raina didn't rush to work. She opened her window wide and let the air in. She made toast, even hummed an old tune she hadn't sung since college. And when Snow climbed up to the windowsill to chase the light that danced on the glass, Raina smiled. The city outside was still the same, noisy, restless, uncaring, but inside this small apartment, a quiet miracle had taken place. Days passed, then weeks. Raina came home earlier from work now. She started leaving a little milk out for Snow before leaving. Sometimes, when she forgot her umbrella, she would laugh to herself and say, "Guess we're both made for the rain, huh?" The neighbors noticed the change too. The quiet woman from the 5th floor wasn't so quiet anymore. They heard her laugh once and couldn't believe it. One evening, Raina was sketching on the balcony. Snow sat beside her, tail flicking in rhythm. The paper began to fill with lines again, not perfect ones, not confident, but alive. "You know, Snow," she said softly, "you don't even speak, but somehow you make everything feel okay." The kitten blinked slowly, the way cats do when they trust you completely. Raina felt a lump in her throat. It had been so long since anyone looked at her without judgment, without expectation, just love. That night, she fell asleep with Snow resting on her chest, and for the first time in years, her dreams weren't gray. The days grew into months. Snow grew bigger, sleek, graceful, confident, but still the same soft heart. Every morning, it waited by the door, meowing softly until Raina smiled. Every night when she painted, it would curl up beside her brushes, like a silent guardian of her dreams. Raina's art changed too. Her paintings started to carry warmth again, shades of sunrise instead of storm. She even hung one in her living room, a small white cat under a rain-soaked umbrella. She titled it simply, "The Day I Was Found." Sometimes Raina would sit by the window at night, Snow asleep on her lap, and she would whisper, "It's funny, isn't it? I thought I saved you, but you saved me first." The city lights flickered like stars outside, and for the first time in years, Raina didn't feel invisible anymore. Because she had found something, or maybe someone, who didn't just see her, but understood her silence. And as the night deepened and Snow's gentle purring filled the air, Raina realized something she hadn't said aloud in a long time. "I'm happy," she whispered. "I'm really, really happy." But life, in its quiet way, was already turning the page. The little apartment had always been silent. It used to echo, every sound bouncing back too quickly, like even the walls were tired of her voice. But now there was a rhythm, a soft sound of paws tapping across the floor, the faint jingle of a tiny collar bell, and sometimes, the sweetest sound of all, a quiet purr at the edge of her dreams. Raina used to live with her silence. Now, she shared it. And somehow, that made all the difference. Snow had a way of filling every corner of her day. When Raina brushed her hair in the morning, Snow would jump onto the sink, trying to catch the reflection in the mirror. When she read at night, Snow would stretch across her lap as if saying, "The world can wait. You have me now." Sometimes Raina would laugh so hard that she'd forget what loneliness felt like. And on the days when she came home tired, Snow would greet her at the door with that familiar soft meow, not just hungry for food, but for her presence. She'd smile every time. "You're my reason to come home," she'd whisper. With every passing week, Raina started painting again. Properly this time. Not just sketches or fragments, but real pieces, full of emotion, color, life. Snow was always there, watching her, sometimes sitting on her lap, sometimes knocking over her brushes like a curious child. Her walls began to fill up again, not with memories of pain, but with proof of healing. There were moments when she'd stop mid-stroke, just to watch Snow sleep near the window, the sunlight catching the soft curve of its body, and she'd think to herself, "This is what peace looks like." One afternoon, Raina got a call from her mother, a voice she hadn't heard in months. They talked for a while, about nothing, about everything. At the end, her mother said, "You sound happy, Raina. I can hear it in your voice." Raina smiled. She looked down at Snow, who was pawing at her sketchbook, and said softly, "Maybe I finally am." Her mother laughed through the phone. "Then keep whatever makes you that way, my dear. Don't let it go." Raina promised she wouldn't. But she didn't know how cruel promises can sound when the world decides to take something away. That evening, she painted something new, something raw. A small white cat sitting by a half-open door. Light spilled in from outside, but the cat's eyes looked toward the shadows, as if it was waiting for someone who hadn't returned. She didn't realize what she'd painted until she stepped back. It felt like a secret between her and Snow, a quiet fear, that happiness this fragile wasn't built to last. But she smiled anyway. "You're my lucky charm, Snow," she whispered. "As long as you're here, I'll be okay." Snow blinked, then curled up beside her foot. And for that night, and the next, and many after, The little apartment on the 5th floor finally breathed again. Because sometimes peace doesn't come with grand gestures or miracles. Sometimes it comes on 4 paws with soft eyes and a promise that doesn't need to be spoken. It was late afternoon, the kind of day that doesn't rush, where the sunlight lingers on every leaf, and the city below hums like a tired lullaby. Raina stood on her rooftop, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, watching the clouds gather above. Snow sat beside her on the old railing, tail curling, eyes half closed, a portrait of calm in a restless world. For a long while, neither of them moved. They just were. 2 souls, different worlds, bound by the same kind of silence, the kind that feels like understanding. Raina sipped her tea and said softly, "You know, Snow, I used to think I wasn't made for love." Her voice trembled just a little. "People, they left when I needed them most. I became quiet so I wouldn't scare them away. But you?" She looked down at Snow, who blinked up at her with those deep, unblinking eyes. "You never asked me to talk. You just stayed." The rain began again, light, playful drops falling across the rooftop. Snow flicked its ears but didn't move. Raina smiled. She reached down and lifted the little cat into her arms. "Promise me something, okay?" she whispered. "If one day I'm gone, don't wait for me. Find someone new. Someone who'll love you like I did." Snow purred softly, pressing its head against her chin. Raina laughed through the tears that had begun to fall. "You're not listening, are you?" They stayed there for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to gray, until thunder rolled across the horizon. Raina whispered again, "You're my peace, Snow. You're the reason I wake up and think, maybe I'm not alone anymore." Snow tilted its head as if it understood every word. Maybe it did. The wind picked up. Rain splashed across their faces. And in that quiet chaos, Raina closed her eyes and said, "I'll never let anything happen to you." It was a promise. One she meant with all her heart, though she didn't know how easily life could take such words and turn them into ache. That night, after drying Snow with a towel and tucking it beside her pillow, Raina stood by the window again. The city below glowed, thousands of lives moving. Laughing, crying, each unaware of the stories quietly unfolding above them. And there she was, a woman once forgotten, who now had a reason to whisper goodnight out loud. "Good night." "Snow," she said softly. "You're my little heartbeat in the silence," Snow purred. The sound soft and steady, the most beautiful kind of lullaby. Raina turned off the light, and in the dark, the 2 of them disappeared into dreams. One woman, one cat, and a promise that the morning would find them together again. But sometimes life doesn't break its promises. It bends them, quietly, cruelly, like the soft crack of thunder before the storm. It started like any other evening. The rain was heavier than usual, pouring down in silver sheets that blurred the city lights. Raina sat by the window, watching droplets race each other down the glass. Snow lay curled on her lap, warm, quiet, content. The room smelled like rain and paint and peace. She looked down at Snow and smiled. "You know," she whispered, "I used to hate the rain. Now I think I'd drown without it." Snow purred, a soft vibration against her skin. That simple sound that told her she wasn't alone anymore. But the clock kept ticking. And the world, cruelly faithful to its rhythm, was about to change everything. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her friend Mira, stuck at the office. "Power's out. You okay?" Raina smiled faintly and typed back, "Just painting. Might step out to grab groceries. Running low." She put her phone away, stood up, and reached for her umbrella. Snow followed her to the door, as it always did, tail brushing her ankle, eyes pleading. "I'll be back soon," she said softly. "Promise." The cat meowed once, short, sharp, like a warning. Raina laughed. "Don't look at me like that. It's just rain." And then she was gone. The city was drowning in noise, cars splashing through puddles, honking, headlights slicing through the darkness. Raina clutched her umbrella tighter. The world shimmered, half real, half reflection, at a crossing, a blinding light. A screech of tires. And then, silence. Just like that. Back in the apartment, Snow stirred suddenly. Its ears twitched. Its body stiffened. The rain pounded harder against the window. but the cat's eyes were fixed on the door. Seconds became minutes. Minutes became hours. No footsteps came. No voice called its name. Snow waited. It curled beside Raina's shoes. It watched the handle of the door. And when thunder struck, it meowed. Once, twice, as if calling out to her through the storm. But no one answered. 3 days later, neighbors found Snow sitting by the door, the red scarf lying beside it, the same one Raina had used to wrap it years ago. When they tried to move the cat, it hissed. It refused to eat. It refused to sleep anywhere else. The neighbors didn't understand. They didn't know that behind that locked door lay an echo that hadn't stopped whispering yet. Don't cry. I know what it feels like to be alone. Snow's ears twitched. Its head lifted. But the voice was gone. Just the rain again. It pressed its nose to the door and stayed that way. For hours. Days turned to nights. Nights turned to weeks. And though no one opened the door, Snow never left. Because somewhere, deep inside its small, loyal heart, it believed promises don't break. They just wait. And the rain. Days turned into weeks. The rain came and went. The world kept moving. But inside that small apartment on the 5th floor, time stood still. Snow waited. It waited by the door every morning, its white fur dull from dust and sleepless nights. It waited through afternoons when sunlight stretched across the floor, but no shadow ever crossed it. And every evening, as the city lights flickered on, Snow curled up on Raina's red scarf, its tiny body trembling in dreams it couldn't understand. The neighbors tried to help. They left food, bowls of milk, warm towels. They spoke gently. But Snow didn't listen. It had learned a different language. One made of footsteps, laughter, and the sound of a key turning in the door. And that sound never came again. So it waited. Rainy nights. Stormy nights, quiet ones. Every sound in the hallway made it lift its head. Every shadow made its heart race. Sometimes it would meow softly, just one note, as if saying, I'm here. But the silence that followed always hurt more than hunger. People in the building started whispering, that cat still waits, doesn't it? It's been months. It's like it knows she'll come back. And maybe it did, because some bonds aren't built by time. They're built by love, the kind that doesn't understand endings. Snow began to lose weight. It stopped chasing the light on the wall, stopped purring in its sleep. But it never stopped waiting. Even when the rains turned to winter, and the cold seeped through the cracks of the window, Snow stayed by the door, the same door that Raina once left through, umbrella in hand, smiling back for the last time. Sometimes, when lightning flashed outside, neighbors swore they heard 2 sounds from inside the apartment, a soft meow, and a woman's voice, gentle and familiar, whispering, "Good night, Snow." But maybe it was just the wind, or maybe love was still there, lingering in the walls, refusing to fade. One morning, the building caretaker found Snow lying beside the door, quiet, still peaceful. Its paw rested on Raina's scarf. Its eyes were half open, as if still waiting for her shadow to appear one last time. There was no pain, no struggle, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when waiting finally ends. They buried Snow under the mango tree behind the building, where sunlight fell softly through the leaves. A neighbor placed the red scarf beside it, folded neatly, like a love letter never sent. And from that day, the 5th floor apartment remained empty. But the neighbors said that on rainy nights, you could still hear it, a faint sound of purring near the door, and the smell of coffee and paint in the air. Because maybe some homes don't lose their souls when people leave. Maybe love leaves echoes in scarves, in smells, in silence, and maybe, just maybe, Raina's little apartment was still breathing, quietly, with her memory and Snow's. A year passed. The city changed. New lights, new faces, new stories. But on the 5th floor of an old apartment building, behind a once-locked door, the silence still waited. Until one bright morning, the sound of keys jingled again. The door creaked open for the first time in 12 months. A young woman stepped inside, her arms full of boxes, her eyes full of dreams. Her name was Ava. She looked around the small apartment, the sunlight pooling on the floor, the faint smell of rain still hiding in.